Mr. Brown, don't you think phones have become a huge part of children's lives these days? I mean, they're everywhere.
Absolutely, Susie. It's like they've become an extension of their hands. But do you think it's entirely a good thing?
Well, one advantage is that phones can be educational. There are so many apps that help children learn languages, math, or even coding. Don't you agree?
True. That's a great point. But don't you think too much screen time can harm their eyesight? How do parents manage that?
That's a valid concern. Still, phones also help kids stay connected with their friends and family. Especially in emergencies, it's reassuring that they can call for help.
That's important, yes. But doesn't constant connectivity sometimes lead to distractions? For instance, how can they focus on their homework with all those notifications popping up?
You're right, distractions are a problem. But another advantage is the access to information. With a phone, kids can research anything for school projects instantly. Isn't that a powerful tool?
It is, but what about the risk of misinformation? Kids might not always know how to differentiate between reliable sources and fake news. How do you teach them that?
That's a challenge for sure. On the flip side, phones can also enhance creativity. They can make videos, take photos, or even write stories on their phones. It's amazing how creative kids can get.
That's inspiring, Susie. But don't you think phones can sometimes isolate children? Instead of playing outside or talking face-to-face, they might spend hours on their devices.
Isolation is a concern, I agree. But don't you think it's also important for kids to learn how to use technology responsibly? After all, the future is digital, isn't it?
Absolutely, teaching responsibility is key. But how do you strike the right balance? How do you ensure kids enjoy the benefits of phones without falling into the pitfalls?
Great question, Mr. Brown. I think it starts with setting clear rules. For example, limiting screen time to an hour or two a day. What do you think?
That's a good start. I'd also suggest encouraging outdoor activities. If kids are busy playing soccer or riding bikes, they're less likely to spend all day on their phones.
True, keeping them active helps. And maybe involving them in family activities, like cooking or board games, could also reduce phone dependency. Do you have any family traditions like that?
We do. We have a no phones at the dinner table rule. It's a small thing, but it helps us connect. Have you tried similar rules at home?
Yes, we have a tech-free Sunday where everyone, including us adults, stays off screens. It's hard at first, but it's refreshing. Would you try something like that?
I might. It sounds challenging, but worth it. One last question. How do you handle social media? Kids seem so drawn to it these days.
It's tricky. I think monitoring their accounts and having open conversations about online safety is key. What would you say is the biggest lesson for parents in this digital age?
For me, it's teaching balance and awareness. Phones are tools, not toys, and kids need to learn that early. Would you agree?
You know, Mr. Brown, it's also about leading by example. If we as adults are glued to our phones, how can we expect kids to do any differently?
That's a very good point, Susie. Kids learn more from what we do than what we say. Do you make a conscious effort to limit your own screen time?
I try to. For instance, I avoid using my phone during family time or before bed. It's not easy, though. Do you have any personal strategies for that?
I've started putting my phone on silent and keeping it in another room when I'm spending time with my grandchildren. It's a small step, but it makes a difference.
That's a great idea. I think small habits like these can create a big impact over time. Do your grandchildren ever question why you're not on your phone like other adults?
Sometimes they do, and I explain that it's more important to spend quality time with them. Surprisingly, they seem to appreciate it. Do your kids notice when you're off your phone?
Yes, and they often comment on it. It's a good reminder that they're always watching us. I think it encourages them to be more mindful about their own phone use.
It's fascinating how much influence we have, isn't it? But tell me, Susie, how do you handle it when your kids insist on using their phones for gaming or entertainment?
I try to strike a balance. I allow them some gaming time, but I make sure it's balanced with outdoor play or reading. What about you? How do you manage screen time with your grandchildren?
We have a screen time for chores rule. If they help with tasks like cleaning or gardening, they earn extra screen time. It works well most of the time. Have you tried any reward systems like that?
Yes, we do something similar. It's a great way to teach responsibility and time management. But I wonder, do you think kids understand the importance of these rules, or do they just follow them reluctantly?
That's a good question. I think it depends on how we communicate. If we explain the reasons behind the rules, they're more likely to understand. How do you approach these conversations with your kids?
I try to be open and honest. I explain how too much screen time can affect their health and why it's important to have a balance. Do you think kids today are more understanding of these issues than we were at their age?
Perhaps. They're growing up in a world where technology is everywhere, so they're more aware of its pros and cons. But I think it's still our job to guide them. Do you agree?
Absolutely, Mr. Brown. It's all about guidance and setting the right example. At the end of the day, it's not just about limiting phone use, but teaching them how to use it wisely.
Well said, Suzy. Phones are powerful tools, and with the right guidance, kids can use them to learn, connect, and grow. It's about balance, isn't it?
Yes, balance is the key. And I think conversations like these help us as adults reflect on how we can do better, too.
I agree. Thank you, Suzy, for this wonderful discussion. It's always enlightening to hear your perspective.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I'm sure our kids and grandkids will benefit from what we've shared today. Mr. Brown, I think the hardest part is keeping up with how fast technology changes. Just when you think you've figured out how to manage one app or trend, another one comes along. Do you ever feel that way?
Oh, absolutely, Suzy. It's like a never-ending race. Just the other day, my grandson was talking about some new platform I'd never even heard of. How do you stay updated on these things?
I try to stay informed by reading parenting blogs and occasionally asking my kids about what's popular. They're usually happy to explain. Do your grandchildren share that kind of information with you?
They do, but only when I ask. I think they enjoy being the experts for once. It's a good way to connect with them, but sometimes I wonder if I'm prying too much. How do you strike the right balance between staying involved and giving them space?
That's a great question. I think it's about timing. If I approach them in a relaxed setting, like during a car ride or while cooking together, they're more open. Do you have any specific moments when your grandchildren are more willing to share?
Yes, during bedtime stories or when we're out fishing. Those quiet moments seem to bring out their chatty side. It's interesting how activities like that can build trust, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's those little rituals that create a safe space for them to open up. But do you ever feel like they might be hiding things, especially when it comes to their online activities?
Sometimes, yes. I try to remind them that they can talk to me about anything without judgment. But it's tricky, isn't it? How do you handle it when your kids are reluctant to share?
I try to stay calm and patient. I let them know I'm there for them and avoid reacting negatively if they do share something difficult. Have you ever had to deal with a tough conversation about their online behavior?
Thankfully, not yet, but I'm always prepared for that possibility. I think the key is to listen more than talk in those moments. Do you agree?
Completely. Listening is so important. Sometimes kids just need to feel heard before they can trust us with their concerns. Do you think this approach works better with younger kids or teenagers?
I'd say it works with both, but teenagers might need more patience. They're at an age where they're testing boundaries. How do you handle it when your kids push back against the rules?
I try to stay firm but fair. I explain why the rules exist and give them a chance to share their perspective. Do you think being flexible with rules sometimes helps?
It can, as long as the flexibility doesn't compromise their well-being. For example, allowing an extra half hour of screen time on weekends seems reasonable. Do you have similar exceptions?
Yes, we do. On weekends or holidays, we're a bit more lenient. But I always remind them it's a privilege, not a right. Do you think kids today appreciate these privileges, or do they take them for granted?
It's a mix, I think. Some kids understand the value of limits, while others might need more reminders. How do you teach your kids to appreciate what they have?
I encourage gratitude by having them reflect on their day and talk about what they're thankful for. It's a small habit, but makes a big difference. Do you think that's something grandparents could do as well?
Definitely. I often share stories about my childhood to help them see how different things were back then. It seems to make them more appreciative. Do you think kids understand the generational gap? Or is it something we need to explain more?
I think they understand it better when we share personal stories like you do. It helps them see the world through a different lens. Do you think technology might someday bridge that gap even more?
It's possible. Technology can connect generations if used wisely, like video calls with distant relatives. But it's still up to us to ensure the human connection isn't lost. Don't you think so?
I couldn't agree more, Mr. Brown. Technology is just a tool. It's how we use it that matters. At the end of the day, it's the love and guidance we give them that shapes their future.
Exactly, Suzy. And conversations like this remind me how important it is to keep learning and growing as caregivers. Thank you for sharing your thoughts today.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. It's always a pleasure exchanging ideas with you. Let's hope our efforts make a positive difference for the next generation.